Hello and welcome to And What Have You, the weekly podcast where I talk about movies, video games, books, and, well, what have you. This week on episode 1, we're talking about Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, more commonly known as Star Wars KOTOR or just KOTOR, because no one wants to say Knights of the Old Republic because it's way too long. So let's get right into it. Knights of the Old Republic is a game made by BioWare, I believe in 2002, so this predates their more recent groundbreaking work. It's kind of like, I don't know, the Daggerfall of the Elder Scrolls. As Daggerfall is to the Elder Scrolls series, so Knights of the Old Republic is to BioWare. It is in much the same format as some of their later games, i.e. a story-based RPG with lots of character development and companions and leveling systems, generally from the third person. That's all the same. But it's Star Wars, obviously. It's licensed by LucasArts. It's set, I believe, 4,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, BBY, which is basically before, I think it's the 5th movie? Or it might have been the 4th movie. The one where they destroyed the Death Star over Yavin. And it's set during what is called, in Star Wars history, the Jedi Civil War. And I'm going to get right into this, but first I want to say that just don't watch this review if you haven't played the game. Just don't. It's not worth it. It's going to forever spoil it for you. And this game has the kind of story where once it's spoiled for you, it's not going to be the same. Nothing will ever be as special as the first time through Star Wars KOTOR without spoilers. Suffice it to say, the emotions are going to be much less strong the second time, and it's not going to mean as much. It's still a good game, but at least with the first game, you want to go through it blind once. So if you have any interest at all in actually playing this game, which you frankly should, definitely play it before this. And this goes for every episode I make, because I'm talking about the stories in these, so I'm going to spoil everything, so get used to that. So we're going to tackle this review in 3 parts. The first one is gameplay, because gameplay is foundational and also sucks in this game. Part 2 is the story, because I consider the story separate from the characters and world. That's just the way I roll, because the characters in the world are part 3. And also the characters make more sense once you tackle the story. So let's get right into it. Part the first, gameplay. Gameplay is the weakest element of KOTOR 1 and KOTOR 2. The same could arguably be said of other BioWare games, but it's not to the same extent. Mind you, KOTOR 2 was actually made by Obsidian on the same engine, roughly. It wasn't made by BioWare. I still consider it a BioWare game, just like Fallout New Vegas is a Bethesda game still, essentially. Even though it's much better on most levels. But the combat in KOTOR 1 and 2 is especially weak comparatively. 3 major reasons why. Combat, items and item variety in the game. Yeah. And then the railroading and lack of choice in the game, which is especially unfortunate given that this is an RPG. We're going to get into it. First off is the combat. Now, combat in this game is roughly based on the D20 system, which stands for Dice 20, or 20-sided die system, which is basically the combat system from Dungeons & Dragons, which obviously was carried over into the Star Wars tabletop games, which were basically Dungeons & Dragons with Star Wars themes. And because of that, it's pretty crap. So, here's a brief summary of D20 for people with lives who haven't spent an embarrassingly large number of hours playing through and never finishing KOTOR games. First off, on any given attack round, so you're in combat, you're like, ooh boy, I'm gonna kill me this raid on this Tatooine desert. So you roll your 20-sided die, and then add a bunch of stuff to it. So, I have a big, long example here. It's gonna be a real pain. So first off, the game rolls. It rolls a number between 1 and 20, thus D20, 20-sided die. So it takes that, and that is your attack roll. So that's what you get by default in the round for free. It gives you this roll. This will make more sense in a minute, I promise. Then it adds a bunch of crap. It adds, for example, your base attack bonus. So, this is your attack bonus that you get per level. It adds to your attack, increases your chances of hitting. So, at level 4, in a perfect world, you get 4. KOTOR messes with this a bit, but it's not really all that important. And then it adds some other stuff. Your strength modifier, for example. Let's say you're using a vibro sword. So your strength bonus is, and let's do it this way. It's strength minus 10 divided by 2. Which doesn't seem very intuitive, I know. But let's say you have 18 strength. Well then, minus 10 is 8. And you divide that by 2. That gets you 4 as your strength modifier, you see? Because for some reason they needed to double the attributes even though they only have a modifier at 2. I don't know why they just don't give them to you at half as often, but that's Dungeons and Dragons for you, I guess. So it takes your strength bonus. So for example, this person has 16 strength. That's 6 above 10. You divide 6 by 2, you get 3. Bada boom, bada bing. Then it subtracts your minus 2 hits. So for example, minus, you said you use Flurry, which gives you an extra attack per round in the game. But also at the medium level Flurry gives you a minus 2 to hit. So it subtracts that and then adds, say, your weapon bonus. Say your weapon gives you plus 4 to attack. And it does all that, and that equals, in this case, with this particular math, 22, which is your attack for this attack round. It compares that to the opponent's defense, and this is static. There's no rolls for defense. It's just a flat number. And if the attack is bigger than the defense, you hit. And so, on a hit, for example, the damage calculations, it rolls however many die the weapon has assigned. So an average longsword has 2d6, meaning 2 6-sided die. So it rolls those 2 die, adds the values together, then adds your strength modifier, because strength adds damage to melee attacks, no duh. So, for example, 2d6, and it adds your feat. If you got a feat that adds damage, that's like, say you get 2 4s, which is an 8, or 3 and a 5, or whatever. And then it adds your strength bonus, plus 3, your feat for weapon specialization, plus 2, that gives you 13 damage. And this is per attack round, which is much more complicated than it sounds, because every singular attack you make per round is an extra attack. Like, that's a whole attack round. So every single time, let's say you have a double-bladed weapon, and you're using Master Speed, which gives you 2 extra attacks. Well, then you have 4 attacks, because a double-bladed weapon will obviously have 2. And then you use 2 extra attacks, so that's 4. So every single one of those attacks gets this calculation right here, with a different roll for the damage and for the base roll of the round. And that's guaranteed. It's going to get every single attack with it. So instead of rolls, you'll get various misses and hits per round. In KOTOR, the rounds are 3 seconds, I believe. Yeah, 3 seconds. It runs on 3-second intervals. Everyone attacks, everyone yada yada yada. So, reasons why this is crap. Because it's RNG, for one. It's literally random number generated. Like, it actually rolls a dice. It's not like, oh man, it's RNG in the sense that some games are. No, it literally rolls dice to determine if you've hit and how much damage you do. As I said here, it's just super bad to have RNG in video games for all those reasons. It is boring, it's frustrating, it removes skill elements. KOTOR, your greatest skill is clicking on things in the right order. So, in fact, this is kind of like MOBAs, get wrecked. For example, using stasis to stun your opponents, and then jump attacking them, and then hitting them with flurry to maximize your sneak attack damage as a scoundrel guardian or whatever. That's the skill element, is plotting out how to build your character. There's no skill in combat. You attack, you maybe spam a med pack through the menus. That's it. That's all there is to the combat. It's boring, frustrating, and is just awful. Because if you miss, you can't do anything about it. Sure, it's your own fault, but it's your own fault 2.5 hours ago at the character creation screen, not 3 seconds ago when you just didn't line your crosshair up. And as I emphasize a lot, it's just super boring. I hate turn-based combat because it's just bad. It's not entertaining. Even the best games at it are good because of how many complications they add to it, not because of the combat itself. So like Pokemon is pretty okay. That will be a future episode, I'm sure. I would rate Pokemon as pretty okay, even though it has turn-based combat, basically because it makes that combat super complicated and interesting, because it's like playing cards. You have to really think about it. So basically D20 is crap, because it's random, and crap, and boring. And it takes a lot away from the game. Another problem with the gameplay, though, because, oh no, it doesn't stop there, is the items. Now I have nice little details written on the screen for you, which I'm going to talk through. In KOTOR, the items are just boring. Now, straight upgrades, just to clarify for those who don't spend their whole lives on computers looking up RPGs, is basically where you get one item, and then the next item you get is better than the previous one, but the same exact item, if you follow. So let's say you have a short sword, and a short sword does 1 to 6 damage, and is a one-handed sword. Then you get a long sword, and a long sword does 2 to 12 damage, and is a one-handed sword. You haven't changed the type of the weapon. Combat is unchanged anyway, you just increase the damage. So in KOTOR, I guess you can consider some side grades, but basically there's a straight upgrade system. You start out, use your short sword, then you go to the long sword, then you get 2-weapon fighting, up to improve 2-weapon fighting, you go to your ritual brand, which is a double-bladed sword, and then you go to your lightsaber. Shocker, you're a Jedi in a game called Knights of the Old Republic. Whoop-de-doo. Yada yada yada. It moves in a line. Good RPGs have combat systems that look like family trees. So, this Mass Effect's a good one here. Here's creation. Here's the adept. And they go up here, and then they split off in all these ways and all these options. And then you get your techies over here, and you get your main combat over here. And these are all the options you have for doing combat. Notice how KOTOR doesn't have that. It has short sword to long sword to ritual. There's no side grades, meaning it is all straight upgrades. Another problem with the game, which we're going to talk about more on the next slide, is how crap the guns are. This doesn't seem like a huge issue, because like you're playing as a Jedi, so guns should be crap, right? Lightsabers are the best thing ever, but it drastically reduces gameplay variety. We're going to get into that in a second, though. Also, it's good to compare the items to Morrowind, and this is a really complex comparison that I like to make. In RPGs, items, just items, it doesn't seem like much, but they have a big effect on the game. I mean, take Dark Souls, the whole quote-unquote story is told through item descriptions, but I'm just going to take Morrowind instead, because it's pretty simple, and everyone can get where you're coming from on it. So Morrowind had chitin throwing stars, or chitin, or whatever. Bug carcass shell throwing stars, because Morrowind had big bugs in the world. So these are throwing stars made out of bug bone. And they were just horrendous. They did like 1 to 3 damage. They used the marksman skill, and at the first store in the game, you get into the store 30 seconds into the game. You can buy a bow that does like 1 to 12 damage, and also buy some one-use throwing stars that do 1 to 3, and have no benefits. And the next town, you can get iron throwing stars that do more damage and are more durable. They were awful. There was a lot of stuff in Morrowind that was just awful. That was like a side grade that didn't even need to exist. It was like a helmet made of troll bones that was shaped like a troll's head. And you know, like, from a gameplay perspective, having an incomplete set of armor, that's pretty bad, just doesn't make much sense, right? Why would you have a trollbone helmet and a trollbone cuirass and not have trollbone gauntlets and trollbone greaves and trollbone boots? Because it's not a full set of armor, and frankly, it doesn't fit in the tier system. Skyrim, for example, had its leather, and then you go to scaled, and then you go to glass, and then you go to dragon scale for light armor or whatever. There's clear progressions, and then it added some side grades that still fit in the tiers roughly later on. Morrowind had here's kind of your rough tier, right? And then there's some stuff here and some stuff there and some stuff through there. You see my point, right? There was some really crappy and unnecessary gear that didn't really add gameplay wise to the game. Not that Morrowind had great gameplay, it was super crap, but still. High grades and a lot of stuff that you just shouldn't use ever, that there should be no excuse for ever using in the game. It's so awful. And yet it added a lot, because if you think about it, you're playing this RPG, right? You're in this world where people make stuff out of bug carcasses because that's all they have. Of course some townsfolk are going to make bug carcass throwing stars. Makes perfect sense. Use them to defend yourself. You happen to have bug carcasses around, why not? 2 + 2 = 4. It makes logical sense that they would exist, and thus it adds to the immersion. If you have Vikings from a cold land who kill trolls for fun, of course they're gonna make trollbone helmets. They're Vikings, that's what they do. It makes sense in the context of the world. There's gonna be crappy gear because in the real world, we have Kia Rios, right? We have our Camaros, but not everything's going to be a Hyundai to a Honda to a Lexus to a Camaro, or whatever the car upgrade progression would be. You also got your Mazdas, and they're just kind of over here looking derpy with their little pop-up headlights. And you got all this extra stuff and your messy stuff. There's not a straight upgrade progression to coffee makers. You got your pour-overs, and you got your espresso makers, and then you got your drip coffee makers, and they all serve their place, and some are worse and some are better, but there's not a tier list to it. There's an argument over what's best. And there's also a lot of cheap stuff produced for people who aren't rich and who don't have all the money in the world. That's what the kite and throwing stars were. And some items were boring in KOTOR. They weren't interesting at all. They were just there. It was a straight upgrade. So you go from this to this to this to this. You go from your single sword to your double sword to your double-bladed sword to your lightsaber to your double-bladed lightsaber. Same with the crystals you put in your lightsaber and all that. It's just a straight progression. This feeds into the next point, which is the lack of gameplay variety. There was a best way to play KOTOR, right? I could rattle off some stats, probably off the top of my head, to do this. You start as a scout. You get 14 strength, 14 dex, 12 constitution, 14 wisdom, 12 charisma, 10 intelligence, which I think maths out correctly. And then you start out, you use your sword, you get 2 weapon fighting as your first feat, you get implant for free as a scout. Then you grind up until you get improved 2 weapon fighting, you use your enchanting ritual brand with flurry, and then you have implant, and then you grind up to level 8 before you leave the first planet, and then you have implant level 3, which is the max in the game. Then you go buy X implant, put on Y gauntlets and X robes, an X headset, yada yada yada. And at the end of the game, you have a double-handed, a double-bladed lightsaber, a fancy headdress, some fancy robes, 3 crystals that you're gonna have put in your lightsaber, and that's it. That's all you got. Every single time. Because there's a best way to play the game. There's better ways. And it's not it's a little bit better. Because, say in Mass Effect, it might be in the first game, most classes are a little bit better than the tech classes. But you can still play the tech classes. No, this is here, I'll show you where it drops. Right here. Double saber with Master Flurry. And the right crystals does 230 damage around. Force can do probably 90-ish if you have Force Lightning and you spam it. But that does it to 4 or 5 people, so that's fine. You can clear out a room with that. Spam it 4 or 5 times, everyone's dead. Boom. Lightsaber can do pretty much the same as the double saber, just drop an attack, so that's like 180-ish. Swords, you're not looking so hot anymore. You can probably scrape like 160. Guns, you might reach 140 if you're lucky. And like fists, like I don't even want to talk about them because it's just pathetic, but like fists you might get like 25. Now notice, there's one right way to play the game, and it's clearly right. It's that 50 damage difference there, and I guess you'd call it 50 there because that's probably averaging out to like 300. That's the that's a make or break thing. It's like this here 50 damage difference between a single saber and a double saber is like, that's the difference between taking someone down to 1 health and killing them. If you get all your attacks in with a double saber, you can 1 round most opponents, and that means you can go on a big chain and like grind through an entire room of people with just your lightsaber in like 30 seconds flat. If you can't, it takes twice as much time, and that's what a single saber does to you. Force Lightning, and I guess this is a good time to make the point. Pretty much the only real option you have, like the real choices, you have 2, dilemma. Alright, is Force versus Saber, and that's one choice. So in an RPG, a role-playing game, which is about making choices and moving through this world as a character, you can play a character 2 ways, one of which is better. That's iffy. There's not a lot of choice, there's not a lot of specialization within classes or within builds. You're basically set. There's one right way to play the game, and not a whole lot of options within that. Compare this to Good Variety. Good Variety, I'm going to compare it to a couple games here, most of which are going to be talked about later, but KOTOR 2 is the next episode. But in KOTOR 2, there was a weapon upgrade system that was significantly better than KOTOR 1's weapon upgrades system. And by significantly, I mean mind-blowingly better. In KOTOR 2, you could use a single saber. You could use force builds. You could use blasters. You could use assault rifles in KOTOR 2. Like, that was an option. You could run around with a friggin' rifle with upgrades slapped in it and spam force speed and rapid shot and just crush people. Like, I was one-rounding people in-game with a blaster rifle. That was doable. Your lightsabers had more build variety. You could go for a critical strike build. You could use flurry. You could do double sabers or 2 sabers or even dueling. Like, there was an argument to be made for dueling because the 1 attack differential didn't make as much difference in that game. It was significant how much more variety there was. And most of it was just in the progression system and the upgrade system. There were more feats and more upgrades that you could slap into more weapons, so it resulted in more interesting gameplay. Compare again to Morrowind. Morrowind had all the options. Like, all the options. You could start off the game and then with spear talent and then go to this one fort and kill this guy to grab a spear with a sword and steal this sword from a tower and wreck people, or you could use bows, or you could use your bare fists if you wanted to. It was more challenging. Or you could go with magic and make spells that both killed people and stopped them from attacking you, so you would never be attacked and would just wipe people off the map, etc., etc. There were an infinite number of options in that game. It was incredible. And in that sense, Morrowind is much better than its following games, which we will talk about. I'm gonna, at some point, put my big boy pants on and do a 3-part series about the Elder Scrolls series. It's just gonna take so much time, I'm not doing it yet. Mass Effect. Mass Effect is KOTOR done better. It still has less variety than Morrowind, for sure. Morrowind is superior in that sense, but that's the whole point of Morrowind, it's freedom. Mass Effect is just KOTOR 2.0, if you will, and it's just better. Like, just way better. I know a lot of people think the ending of Mass Effect 3 forever ruined that series for them. I won't talk about that. But for the vast majority of the games, the characters... I wouldn't say the characters are better than KOTOR. We're going to talk about that in a bit. The characters are good. The story is fantastic. The world building is just exceptional in Mass Effect. But more importantly, the combat variety and gameplay variety is so high. And I know, it's like ultimately you're just spamming cooldowns and clicking on things. But it's that, but better. It's funner. There's cover. There's more skill. More ways of comboing, more interesting powers, and more variation in powers. It was better. Alright, I've clearly talked myself into a hole, so let's go to part 2. Part the second, the story. Just let me get myself prepared here. The story in KOTOR 1, I'm going to run through. I only have one slide for this, because just some basic commentary. I'm going to run you through it real quick. And let's read the commentary first. The story is a series of MacGuffins. Now, MacGuffin is basically an excuse for a plot to progress. That's one way to think about it. It's like the magical thing you have to find to do X. Now, if you pause for a minute and think about every story you've ever read, approximately 3/4 of them have a MacGuffin. Oh, I need to find this sword because it can X. Or, oh, I need this ring because of X. Or, oh, I need X because X. And it's just really an excuse for the plot to progress in the way the writer wants it. Which is not equal to bad, by any means. MacGuffins are not bad. Stories have used them for hundreds of years. They're a time-honored tradition. And they work. Because in real life, they're MacGuffins, frankly. Oh, you need college so you can go get your next MacGuffin, etc., etc. The story in KOTOR is a glorified series of MacGuffins that goes to a big bad MacGuffin, as I like to call it. So I'll run you through it. So, MacGuffin number 1. You get out of bed, and you're like, I'm totally in underwear, what's going on? And of course, you're in a ship that's being attacked in outer space, because that's what every Star Wars story ever has done since ever. So you're like, oh crap, what's going on? And then this dude runs in, and he's like totally chill with you being in underwear even if you're a chick. And he's like, yo, we're getting attacked. And you're like, no tip, Sherlock. And he's like, we need to go save this Jedi because she's really important. Let's go to the bridge. Get your gear out of the box. And you're like, yay, pants. So he convinces you to put pants on. And you walk out of this hallway, and somehow there's some enemy troopers there that didn't kill the guy, even though that was the only way into your room. And so you kill them, and you murder your way through this whole ship. You level up. You discover that Special Jedi Lady is not on the bridge of the ship where she's supposed to be. And you're like, oh crap, we still need to save Special Jedi Lady. So you go to the escape pods. You can go down to the planet and not die. Generico tutorial man sacrifices himself to prevent a dark Jedi from cutting your liver out with a lightsaber. You run away like a little prick, and you're done. That's that. That's over. You escape into the escape pods with a guy who you later find out has a massively terrible attitude, and you wake up with a big royal headache. Which is pretty much the intro of every BioWare game ever. Let's not talk about that, though. So yeah. See, then you find MacGuffin number 2, which happens to be the same thing as MacGuffin number 1, Mysterious Jedi Lady, who's really important because she can do this thing called battle meditation, which makes people focus. So basically, she's a glorified Force Adderall for an entire army at once. Frankly, I just give them Adderall, but whatever. So you're out on this mysterious planet made out of skyscrapers. So you, of course, go to the logical thing and drink yourself silly at a cantina. And discover a Sith trooper who's, like, mega looking to get some. Of either gender. If you're either gender, you get a Sith trooper who's looking to get some. It's not a sexist thing. They invite you to this shady party where they're at after work. And don't get me wrong, the Sith are the bad people. To put some context in this, you're a generic.co soldier in the Jedi Civil War, which is Sith versus Jedi plus Republic, because that's basically every Star Wars story ever. So these Sith trooper invite you to a party after you talk your way into it, like a swagger, and then you go murder a bunch of people in a dueling ring for money because you're definitely a good person. Then you go to this party, and you're like, "Hey, Lamo, how you doing?" And then everyone drinks themselves unconscious and you steal their clothes. Which means you now have a Sith uniform. So you use that uniform to go down to the lower city, because only Sith troopers are authorized to go down to the lower sections of the city. The lower sections of the skyscrapers, if you will. And you go down there, and like, turns out there's a gang war going on that you just happen to walk into. And the bad gang, the dark side gang, managed to get your massive MacGuffin. And you're like, oh no, I need her though. So you go to the good gang, and you're like, hey, help. And they're like, alright, give us those uniforms, we'll get you down to the lower city. You can go to our enemy's base, and then murder your way through them, bring back this cool engine that we made, and we'll slap it on a bike for you. And we'll let you race in the annual race, and you can win your MacGuffin as a prize. And you're like, wait a second. Why do I have to win her as a prize if I already murdered the entire enemy base? And the story's like, and then you move on with your life. So you do that. You're like, alright, I'll sing on with the good game and race using this super special mega engine, which is essentially the equivalent of running nitro through your engine all the time in space terms. So you go, and you go down to the lower city, which is called the Undercity. Because apparently, rather than having like a reasonable justice system with actual punishments, you either get killed or banished to the lower city on Terrace, the planet you're on. And it turns out that the lower city has a bunch of zombies in it. And you're like, oh no, zombies, and everyone's dying, and there's this whole pitiful group of people down there. And you're like, hey Lamo, have you seen this Twi'lek girl? Because you're supposed to find this Twi'lek to help you sneak into the enemy base and murder your way through it. And they're like, yeah, you go over there. So you murder a bunch of zombies, everyone's like, you're the best. This Twi'lek runs up to you and like, hey, my Chewbacca, Zelbar, was taken by slavers' help. And you're like, where are they? And she says, conveniently right where we need to go to get to the enemy base. And you'll be like, alright, we'll go kill a bunch of slavers. Sounds good. So you massacre a bunch of slavers, you rescue a Wookiee, he pledges himself to you, the usual. Then you go into the enemy base and massacre a bunch of bad gang people. Then the enemy offers that you get to murder the good gang and side with them, and you don't do it because canonically you follow the light side path. You steal the special engine. Then you race. You win easily. And then Bastila frees herself and is like, yo, I'm better than you, I'm a Jedi, I saved myself, you didn't save me. And you're like, I literally chased you halfway across this planet, you MacGuffin. I saved you totally, you would have died, you didn't even have a lightsaber. And she's like, lol, no. But you get your MacGuffin, because you have to murder a bunch of gang members, as you do. And so you return to your abandoned apartment hideout, and you're like, what do we do, guys? And everyone's like, IDK. So you gotta get drunk at the bar again, and this Mandalorian walks up, and he's like, hey, Lamo, I want to get off this planet, and my gang boss leader has this really cool ship that'll let us get off this planet, and I really hate him, so if you go steal the launch codes so we don't get destroyed by autocannons, then we can go to my gang boss leader's house, murder him and steal his really cool ship, and then get off this planet. And you're like, sounds cool. So you take this robot that you are sold for a heaping load of credits, because video games, and you break into the Sith base and kill everyone and steal the launch codes so you don't get shredded by autocannons. Then you go back to Mandalorian, he's like, hey, let's go kill my gang boss leader. And you're like, okay. So you do that. You steal his ship, you fly away. Voila, you got MacGuffin number 1. So then you go to another planet called Dantooine, where there's a Jedi Academy, apparently, because reasons. And they're like, yo, you totally have the Force. And you're like, nah, I'm just super Trill. And they're like, no, you totally have the Force, dog. We're gonna train you. But then they're like, nah, we aren't. Then they're like, but there's so much risk in training an adult. And you're like, screw it, let's do it. And they're like, alright, fine. So, inevitably, since you're a protagonist, you learn how to be a Jedi in like 2 days, because that's what protagonists do. Then they give you a whole bunch of bullcrap trials, including not killing a Jedi who went rogue. Then you get a lightsaber, finally. And then they're like, hey, there's these old ruins that you apparently had a dream about. Go check them out. And you're like, alright. Because by now, Miss MacGuffin and you are Force bonded, of course, because of video games. And because forced romance, I mean, plot. So, this Force bond lets you have the same dreams. You go check out these ruins, and like, yo, there's this like 40,000-year-old map here that leads to this 40,000-year-old thing that was constructed by this 40,000-year-old race that used to run the entire galaxy. And you're like, nah, that's impossible. And they're like, no, but really. And you're like, oh, okay. And then it says, there's some other maps on these convenient 4 other planets that also happen to be cool planets to visit and have oddly different plot devices on them. And you're like, alright, cool. And so the story says, basically these are some MacGuffins, go get them so you can find this evil Sith base that's hidden. And you're like, alright, I guess. So, you do that. You're set free, you get your ship from the gang boss that you murdered, you go to 4 different planets. Planet 1 is Kashyyyk, which is where Wookiees are from. It's covered with trees that are literally like 10 kilometers tall, which is 5 miles for you plebeians. And you go there, and there's an evil corporation that's enslaving them, and Wookiee boss also happens to be the brother of the Wookiee who follows you around, and your Wookiee friend got kicked out of town because he beat up his brother after his brother started selling people into the slavers. And long, complicated plot. You go down to Lower Forest where there's a bunch of bad things because it's the forest bed and it's dark, and you murder a bunch of people. And you get this hella old sword, and then you go back up and murder a bunch of slavers after inspiring the Wookiees to rebel against their evil leader. And you do all that. You find your map on the forest floor. It tries to kill you, which we may talk about in a bit. Then you leave the planet, and you're like, yeah, it was pretty trill. So you go to Tatooine. And, shockingly, there's a scummy corporation on Tatooine that does the mining that wants you to murder all the sand people because the sand people are murdering them. Which is actually kind of fair, even though it's dark-sided if you murder all the sand people, don't you know it? So you're like, alright, I guess. If you know if I can get a map out of this, then I'll do it. Because you're on a desert planet. You gotta find this star map somehow, and you need, like, guides to it. Corp's like, nah, but the Jawas might. So you talk to the Jawas, and they're like, yeah, we're enslaved by the sand people. If you murder everyone, we'll give you the map. And so then you hire an assassin bot so that he can translate to sand people-ish, so you don't have to murder them. And you go through a whole bunch of plot devices, then you find your MacGuffin, then you go to another space planet where there's a peace treaty because it produces the only healing substance in the entire galaxy somehow. And they're like, yeah, we don't sell to either side. We don't prefer either side of this war. We just want to make money. And you're like, y'all are scum. And they're like, if you fight, we'll kill you. And you're like, you're still scum. So you go there. There's some long, complicated crap. You break into the Sith base to get this part so the Republic isn't found out to be scum that are working around the treaty. Then you go down to this super secret subaquatic Republic base where they happen to discover some ancient ruins that also happen to be the star map you need. So you find your star map, you like stop this giant fish from killing everyone. It also happens to be the ancestor of the Selkath somehow because reasons. The Selkath are the fish people on the water planet that you're on, which I guess I didn't mention. Then you totally leave and you go to the Sith Academy on the 4th planet where there's apparently another star map. and you convince them that you're totally not there to murder them all. And then you murder a bunch of them. And the Academy head's like, yo, you're pretty trill. Let's go check out this map. Because they're Sith and murder is good. So you check out the map, and then you murder the Academy head, and then his apprentice. And you're like, wow, I have all 4 maps. Now, I should add, right before you get to your 4th planet, you're attacked. And this is the big bad reveal in the story, right? This is why you should totally play the game before listening to this part of the review. You're captured by an enemy ship that happens to have the admiral of all the enemy fleets on it, who your best friend wants to kill. We'll talk about that. And you're like, oh crap, what's happening? And he's like, don't you know? And you're like, no what? And he's like, oh, you don't? Haha, that's funny. And you're like, hey, what's going on? And then he tortures you. And then the big bad Darth Generico Sith Lord Malak comes. You're like, oh crap, we're about to escape though, because we totally didn't hide our astromech droid to boot up an hour after we were captured. And so you escape, shock, and you go down to fight Generico Sith Lord. We're going to talk about this too, because it's a complaint I have. And like, he's like, hey, you know how I killed my master? And that started out this, after this whole Civil War started, halfway through I killed my master and took over everyone, like all Sith do. And you're like, yee. He's like, well, that was you. Now this is, in story terms, fantastic. The mid-story reveal meaning that you were the big bad, and that you almost died, and then the Jedi Council mind-wiped you and tricked you into being their pawn, is awesome. That's exactly what happened, by the way. The Jedi Council mind-wiped you, rebuilt your identity, set you as generic soldiers so you could work with Bastila, and then decided to, after much debate, train you into being a Jedi again, and give you new access to the Force. So you did that. And then they sent you halfway across the galaxy to find all these star maps and kill your former apprentice. This is a brilliant twist on every level. I would consider it one of the all-time great story twists. And then, of course, after your love interest / force bonded / forced onto your love interest / plot device / ex-MacGuffin, Bastila is totally captured. I'm going to complain about that in a second. And then you go on to your 4th planet to rescue her by finding the star map and finding their base, yada yada. Alright. So the story reveal that you are Darth Revan is what he was called, the previous Dark Lord of the Sith, with Malak, the current Dark Lord, as his apprentice, is awesome. But there's a downside to it. So, Bastila is supposed to get captured, and you're supposed to run away because you totally can't beat Malak. But the minor little stumbling block is that if you're like me and know how to build a character in the D20 system, you get to this point in the story, and you start fighting Malak, and you're supposed to fight him twice and not be able to beat him, right? And you fight him. First thing you do is use the Force to freeze him solid so he can't move, and then in one round of attacks, take his health to 0. And then he runs away, and you go and do the exact same thing. And then Bastila's like, no, I need to sacrifice myself, because you totally can't beat him. And you're literally just shrekking him. He's going to pieces. You literally are just demolishing him. And the game's like, oh no, you can't ever defeat him. And it's just stupid. And so Bastila sacrifices herself. You totally gotta save her, because you totally, want to get some, and she seems like she's pretty loose, so you're rolling with it. So you go on to do so. With your newfound discovery that you're Darth Revan, and all these crime groups are like, hey, we'll sell you some weapons, so you buy some. Then you find the last map, you go to the big bad place, kill a lot of generic mooks, do some generic light size stuff. Then you find Bastila, tell her to be a good person, she's like, hell nah. And then you go up to a big bad space station that makes ships out of thin air, somehow. Which is how the Sith are building their fleet. and you kill a bunch of mooks, and you fight Bastila and demolish her and say, hey, be good, and she's like, oh, okay, if you love me, and you're like, yeah, I'll take some. She's like, alright, cool. Then you go kill the big bad after he tells you that you can't possibly defeat him because he's an absolute scrub and worthless. And you're like, yay, we saved the world. Now the best part of the story is by far the reveal that you are the previous big bad. I don't think that's something that's been done very often, and it's fantastic on many levels. It's not perfect. It has some unintended consequences. For example, if you play the game as a good person and then get revealed that the Jedi Council mind-wiped you and forced you to be a slave, like me, there's a very real urge to start rampantly murdering people and doing evil crap again. Because that's really scummy. It's like really, really scummy. It does have the interesting side effect, and we'll talk about this more in world building, I think. Representing the Jedi Council as not being perfect, which is not done very often. So anyways, that's the story. Now, as I said at the bottom of this, it ain't bad. I wouldn't consider it the best story of all time. It's not unique. It has a good twist, but it doesn't explore great themes or anything. It's pretty much about kill the big bad to rescue the princess, ultimately. Which isn't bad, and it executes it well. So it gets a 7 out of 10. It's above average, but not perfect. So on to part the third, because I'm running out of time. Part the third, characters and world. This is the good stuff. Characters are by far the best thing in KOTOR. This is followed up by the Mass Effect series, which did the same thing, and Dragon Age, and pretty much every BioWare game ever. The characters are great. I would say executed perfectly. Now, a lot of people don't like characters, but that tends to rest on the fact that there's enough there to, not like, you know. Like, there's some reasons to not like them, and I'm not marking the least likable characters at all here. I'll give you a brief run-through. I will say that it's going to be hard to, like, understand how great these characters are without playing the game and listening to the voice acting yourself. Carth is a Republic pilot. He's the first person you meet, or whatever. And you later find out he has some trust issues because he served in this previous war that has a big effect on the world against the Mandalorians, and the Jedi were like, we don't want to get involved, but Revan and Malak were like, let's save the universe, and so they did. And he served in that war, and he was totally trill with Revan. And then Revan started massacring the Republic for no reason, and Carth was like, heck no. And then Carth's previous mentor proceeded to bomb Carth's planet into smoldering ruins for no reason. And Carth's like, wow, I have some trust issues. And everyone's like, you can't do that on the internet. And I'm like, yes, because your planet's totally been destroyed by your former best friend. So that's basically Carth's character. You go on to discover his son joined the Sith, and then you talk his son out of it, and Carth's like, cool. And if you're female, Carth is totally chill with you. Bastila, I don't like very much. She starts out arrogant, turns into a wimp, and then eventually turns to the dark side. And her whole character is basically set up to do that, because she gets caught by the Sith, and is tortured into being dark side. Whatever, you know. She misses her family. She has very little self-control, because somehow Jedi managed to recruit a bunch of toddlers who would eat the marshmallows rather than waiting for the later one, which just blows my mind. She has anger issues and all that good stuff, but she's still human. She cared about her dad, hated her mother, thought her mother dragged her dad into treasure hunting. It's a unique character. Zelbar, we kind of touched on. His brother excommunicated him for trying to stop him selling his people into slavery for money. It's long, complicated, but it's tied into Kashyyyk mission. Twi'lek, 14 years old. Her brother abandoned her when she was 5. She thinks it's because he found this hot girl, but instead it's her brother just being human scum, and she discovers that. You save him, and then he continues to be human scum. Jolee is one of my favorite characters. He's this old war veteran Jedi who left the Jedi because, as you find out deep into Jolie's story, Jolie let his wife live after she turned to the dark side, and then she ended up killing like 50 people, and he holds himself accountable. Even though the Jedi were like, nah, you're good. You couldn't have done anything. Jolie's like, I'm totally guilty. Kill me. And they're like, nah, dog, you're a Jedi Knight now. And he's like, I'm out. So he leaves. He has all these cool war stories from back in the day, and he lives on Kashyyyk when you meet him, and he's like really cool and really sassy. Has all sorts of great lines. Juhani I hate. She's boring. She was a slave and boring, and she was boring, and her story was boring. C3M4 is a robot. There's not a lot to be said about him. Canderous tells you great war stories since he was a Mandalorian from the previous war about how he massacred thousands and thousands of innocent civilians, and it's totally cool because he tells them so well. And you totally love it. This guy right here. Character of the decade. By far. HK-47. That's Hunter Killer, meaning assassin droid. He's an assassin droid, and somehow he manages to be the best character ever in KOTOR 1 and even better in KOTOR 2. Turns out later that when you discover you're the big bad, that you constructed him to kill people, which is pretty cool. And he does that. He loves killing people. He loves mass murder. He hates that you kind of became a wimp and stopped murdering people. And somehow he manages to be the most entertaining character in the entire game. By far one of the top 10 characters of, I would say, since the start of the 2000s in video games. He's just brilliant. It's just awesome. I can't even describe why it's so awesome. You just have to play the game. And some of these characters are fantastic. If you've played Mass Effect and you're like, wow, those characters were great, these characters, I wouldn't say they're better necessarily. I would say they're better in the sense that the Star Wars universe has a longer legacy and more material to work with to make good characters. People will disagree with me on that, but that tends to make them more believable, at least within their universe. I'm running out of time, so I will say this. I'm going to keep this short. I've tried to. Characters in KOTOR are the best thing ever. They're some of the best characters in gaming history. They single-handedly make the game good. The worlds fall under the same classification as the characters. In short, they're fantastic. There's great variety. You go from a desert planet with scummy corporations to a slaving operation planet with scummy people being enslaved, and then you go to like the Switzerland of the war where they're trying to like stay as a non-participant in it, even though some of them are working out underhanded deals, and it's like you're always on the edge of being thrown in jail. And then you go to the Sith Academy, then you go to the rulers of an old empire, and it's just great. It's just awesome. The worlds are internally consistent. The universe is internally consistent. The world building is awesome. The detail that's put in to every facet of the creation of this universe is fantastic. It's amazing. It's just great overall. Again, I'm running out of time and breath, but suffice it to say, the world design is great. I'm not going to talk about that because that's like a 4-episode thing to explain one world and why it's great, so we aren't going to. Suffice it to say, world building and character building fall under the same level of just awesome. So in sum, KOTOR 1 is great. I wouldn't call it flawless. It definitely only gets an 8 out of 10. Because the gameplay is only 8. You know? It's fine. It's not bad. But it's certainly not exceptional. It doesn't, like, completely destroy the game's rating because this is an RPG, and RPGs have a history of gameplay. So, you know, it's kind of okay to have gameplay as an RPG, because that's not the point of it. The point is this stuff. So RPGs will always kind of have gameplay, I would say the KOTOR gameplay is worse than because D20 is just horrible. It's just horrible. RNG turn-based combat systems are like the worst thing ever. By far. The gameplay is just really bad compared to the rest of the game. It's certainly still like a 5 out of 10, I would say. It's not worse than average, but it's really not above average. The story is above average. I'd give that about a 7 out of 10. It's not perfect. I wouldn't consider it one of the greatest stories in gaming history. There's some flaws with it, but it's definitely good. It's executed well. The twist is awesome compared to other twists, and it never fails. There's not points where you're like, wow, that was garbage. It's good. It's good enough. The characters in the world are 9 out of 10. Easily. I'd say the characters are probably 10 out of 10. That actually goes for most BioWare games, though, so don't get too excited. By far, some of the best characters I've ever experienced in a video game. They're believable, their stories make sense, it's consistent with the world, they're fascinating, they're funny. It's just brilliantly executed overall. The characters are amazing, and the world is really, really good. So overall, the game gets an 8, which is respectable. I don't think it's the best BioWare game I'm going to review, by any means. When I get around to Mass Effect, I expect that it's going to end up above that. At the very least, KOTOR 2 had the potential to be a 9, as compared to KOTOR 1 being an 8. We're going to talk about that. It gets messy with KOTOR 2. But suffice it to say, the game is great. Gameplay is the story is good, the characters are fantabulous. And that is KOTOR 1. If you want to find me on social media, you can email me at andwhathaveyou.podcast@gmail.com, or follow me on Twitter at andwhathaveyou, or join my Facebook group at andwhathaveyou. Bada bada bing, all that good stuff. Oh, and I think my Instagram handle is at andwhathaveyou. I'll double check that for next week. See you around. Thanks for joining me and sitting through 57 minutes now of me rambling about crap. It's been awesome. Definitely play KOTOR 1. Add it to your list. Solid game.